Congolais, Congolaises, combattants de l'indépendance aujourd'hui victorieux. L'indépendance du Congo, si elle est proclamée aujourd'hui dans l'entente avec la Belgique, pays ami, avec qui nous traitons d'égal à égal, nul Congolais digne de ce nom ne pourra jamais oublier que c'est par la lutte qu'elle a été conquise. Une lutte dans laquelle nous n'avons ménagé ni nos forces, ni nos privations, ni nos souffrances, ni notre sang. Nous avons connu le travail harassant, exigé en échange de salaires de misère. Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera les fusillades où périrent tant de nos frères, les cachots où furent brutalement jetés ceux qui avaient échappé aux balles des soldats dont les colonialistes avaient fait l'outil de leur domination. Tout cela, mes frères, nous en avons profondément souffert et nos blessures sont trop fraîches et trop douloureuses encore pour que nous puissions les chasser de notre mémoire. Tout cela, mes frères, nous vous le disons tout haut, tout cela est désormais fini. La République du Congo a été proclamée. Et notre pays est maintenant entre les mains de ses propres enfants. Nous allons établir ensemble la justice sociale et assurer que les terres de notre patrie profitent véritablement à ses enfants. Voilà, sire, Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, mes chers compatriotes, mes frères de lutte, mes frères de race, voilà ce que j'ai voulu vous dire. Vive l'indépendance de l'unité africaine. Vive le Congo indépendant et souverain.
They caught him on his way to Stanleyville and flew him back. Patrice Lumumba securely wrote. And with him were men who served in his cabinet when he was Prime Minister. They were bundled into a heavily guarded lorry and driven off towards a place called Binza. Lumumba had been under house arrest, protected by UN troops in Leopoldville, when he escaped. His recapture was quite a triumph for Colonel Mobutu, who now saw his enemy arrive. Lumumba's bonds are tightened. They were taking no chances. And his wife and child watch his humiliation. The whole affair, of course, serves to underline once again the conditions prevailing in the Congo. It's not enough to arrest a man. He must apparently be beaten up as well, then put him on trial later, no doubt.
Congolese have been massacred by white people in the Congo for years and years and years. And if the shoe is now on the other foot, only thing I can say is it's like chickens that always come back home to roost.
Do you personally feel, though, that there's some shame or involvement here or some guilt associated with the killing of other human beings?
I think that the white people should be ashamed of the deplorable situation that has been existing in the Congo, which is not the fault of the Congolese, but which is the result of instigation by European powers who are fighting each other over the mineral wealth of the Congo. And now to make it appear that the Congolese themselves are criminals or brutes because they're reacting to these injustices that they've been victimized by is again ducking the question.
Shambi is the murderer of Lumumba, who was the rightful prime minister of the Congo. Shambi is the man whose forces fought against the United Nations forces and against the United States, and despite this criminal past of Shambi, now the United States is backing Shambi, who has hired South African mercenaries who are hired killers to disrupt the peaceful efforts of the freedom fighters from Stanleyville to make the type of country there that they want. And it is this American support of Shambi, actually, that's at the root of the whole...
Hello, family. This is the African Esquire channel, and I'm here to talk to you with a new video. There's a lot going on the continent of Africa this week, and I want to specifically focus on the DRC particularly because today is January 17th. It is the anniversary of the brutal assassination of Patrice Lumumba inside of the DRC. He was the first prime minister of the Congo after its independence. And it's a very somber day, I think, for most people, because Patrice Lumumba was someone who had a lot of vision for how he's seen the future of African people. He had a lot of promise, he had a lot of charisma, and he had a heart to actually do the right thing in his country. And unfortunately, a lot of times whenever African leaders came up, especially during this time, who actually wanted to do good by the people, who actually wanted to serve the people and wanted to undo the devastating effects that colonialism had on Africa, undo those effects from the population. Anytime those leaders emerged, basically, the West seen them as a threat to Western dominance, to Western interest, because obviously Western interests on the continent of Africa always are going to come into conflict with the interest of African people. So because of that, he was brutally murdered, and a lot of people were hurt by that. A lot of people still are hurt by that, especially because the DRC has not recovered. And we had some very surprising election results. A lot of people are expressing disappointment about the recent election that was on December 30th, 2018. A lot of people thought that a lot of people thought that one party was going to win and then another party ended up winning, and it's very likely that the issue is actually with fraud in the election. So a lot of people are disgruntled about that. I'm going to summarize the issues and read from an article in Al Jazeera, but rather than focusing on whether or not one party should have won over the other party, I'm going to try to look at the bigger picture as far as what the Congo actually needs, what African people actually need, why getting hung up on the democratic process inside of Africa is just as futile as being hung up on a democratic process inside of America. And if you're someone who's watching from America, you may feel, for example, that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both have shown that they do not have a true regard for African people in the United States. And regardless of who wins or who loses, while one might make you feel better and the other one might make you feel worse, the fact is that overall the conditions of our people have remained the same through the Obama presidency, previous to that, through the Bush presidency, through the Clinton presidency, the Reagan presidency, and even now through the Trump presidency. Although people hate Trump so much, if we're going to be honest, the hood is still the hood that it was whenever Clinton was in office, whenever Obama was in office, whenever Bush was in office. It's still the same hood now that Trump is in office. And this is the same thing, I'm going to argue, that when we look at these political situations, we look at these democratic fights, we're told that that is our only dog in the race as far as actually getting change. And the truth is, if we're actually going to analyze what change means, change cannot necessarily be done inside of the confounds of the democratic process if there's not a movement that precedes that change. So if you look at, for example, whenever Patrice Lumumba was gaining power in the Congo, when you look at when other African leaders throughout the continent at the time were gaining power, whether it be Lumumba or Sekou Touré, whatever, it was preceded by a movement. It wasn't just a crazy situation where African people were being exploited and, they said, well, let's just have an election. That will decide everything. And then the election happened and then everything went away. No, actually, what you had was a lot of grassroots work happening among the people. You had the people who wanted change. You want the people who wanted a decolonized Africa. You want the people who were actually rallying and organizing in order to see something happen. And because of the level of organization, it was impossible for the West to maintain power and maintain control over the regions of Africa. So it was pressure that they put on the Western governments that made them say, well, fine, you can have your little election. And again, in a lot of those elections, initially, Pan-Africanists were elected. People like Lumumba were elected. People like Nkrumah, people like Haile Selassie, a lot of people like that had power at that time because the understanding at that time period was that Pan-Africanism was the only logical way to combat colonialism, and uniting Africa is the only way to equip Africa to not let colonialism, neocolonialism, any type of ism divide the continent and divide the people, and divide, not just divide, but actually divide and conquer the continent as a whole. So when you consider that, and you consider the fact that there was a movement in all of these countries, and Nkrumah was elected by a movement, so was Lumumba. All these people were elected by movements, not just by the suggestion that we need a election. Then the question doesn't just become, oh, when are we going to have an election? When are we going to have a regime change? When are we going to get Joseph Kabila out of power? Because that's what a lot of people were saying. When are we going to get Kabila out of power? Kabila's been in power too long. We need to change. We need to change. The question doesn't become that, but the question actually becomes, when are we going to have a movement to actually change what the continent looks like? When are we going to have a movement that says that there's no way that in the richest country in the world, which is the Congo, the most minerally rich country in the world, that should be one of the poorest countries in the world? There's no way that could make sense. So something is happening regardless of who's in power, regardless of whether it's the Kabila leadership, regardless of if it's some other party that comes into power. There's still an issue if you have the most minerally rich country in the world actually having the poorest people. There's an issue as far as who's actually controlling the wealth. There's an issue whenever you have these leaders, these presidents who actually have the ability to become millionaires and billionaires, and these politicians who are millionaires and billionaires while the people are poor. So something's wrong. It's not just who's in power. It's not just who won the election. Something's wrong. It's way deeper than it being an issue of Kabila not being in office anymore, or an issue of election fraud. Something's wrong from the bottom to the top. And I honestly believe that what we need to see is a movement on the continent. We need to see a movement, not just in the politics, but a movement among the people, an organization of the people understanding what do we need to do, what needs to happen, and how do we undo this unjust system, because this system is not one that has been created to serve us. This system has been created to subjugate us, which is why we continue to be subjugated many years after the King Leopold of Belgium actually supposedly released Congo to no longer be colonized. We now know that it's not just Belgium that's in the Congo. We have the US in the Congo. We have the UN in the Congo. We have all types of countries trying to get a piece of the pie, because that is where the most wealth is. And so something is wrong where we're this far into time and things have not gotten better since Lumumba was assassinated. Things have only worsened. And so we have to make a conscious decision. Do we want to continue allowing our conditions to worsen? Or are we willing to do something completely radical outside of the confines of democracy, outside of the senators and the parliament, outside of electing officials? What is going on under that? What's going on with the economics? That should be our biggest question. What's going on with the minerals? What's going on with the resources? I would not care who's elected. I want to know who's the one controlling the resources. Who's the one making deals with Western governments? Why is it that we are living in a state of emergency, and yet we're supplying the cobalt that's going to go to every single person in the West and be made into iPhones and Apple computers and all these things? How is it that we're facing a state of emergency, but somehow they're managing to get all these resources out to these corporations, these Western, American, European corporations? How is that possible? Why are we not doing this in a way that actually benefits the people? Why are we poor and they're rich? Why are they rich when they don't have what we have? That's the biggest question. How is the West, how is China, how is America, how are these places so rich when they don't have anything close to the mineral deposits that are in Africa? Those are the questions that have to be asked. So with that being said, just to briefly go through the results, and I apologize for any of my Congolese brothers and sisters because I'm probably going to butcher some names, but I'm going to try my best as usual. So this is from Al Jazeera. This title of this article is "What is Next for the DR Congo After the Disputed Election?" So the outcome of the December 30th general election in the Democratic Republic of the Congo baffled even the most seasoned watchers of the country. If we are to believe the provisional results that were not announced by the Congolese National Independent Electoral Commission on January 9th, opposition leader Felix Tshisekedi decisively won the presidential election with 36% of the votes. The runner-up, Martin Fayulu, the leader of the Lamuka coalition, scored 34.8%, and Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, the presidential candidate for Joseph Kabila's ruling Common Front for the Congo, came third with 23.8%. However, the FCC coalition won the senatorial and legislative elections in a landslide. In other words, at least according to Sini, the Congolese people overwhelmingly rejected Ramazani Shadari's presidential bid, but gave the coalition supporting him a supermajority in both the Senate and the Parliament. So, if that makes sense, that would be like the Republicans basically sweeping the House and the Senate, although the country elects a Democrat, which does happen, but it's also very strange, seeing that this is the first election in the Congo for a long time. You would think that the people would probably vote vote for the same party as the president as they do for the parliament, but that's what you would think, although that's not what the results were. So the puzzling result led most reasonable observers of the election to come to the conclusion that Tshisekedi's unexpected win was the result of a backroom deal between Tshisekedi and the FCC coalition aiming to help Kabila maintain control over important ministries and the security services with the help of a friendly president in the coming years. So I'm going to stop right there. As I said, the rest of the article you can read on Al Jazeera, or there's lots of other articles online that you can read also. So we have a questionable election, and it's thought that this election is done in such a way to allow Kabila, Joseph Kabila, who has been the ruling president over Congo for decades and has done horrible things to the Congolese people, to sell them out to Western interests that also benefit his pocket. But this is all basically a ploy to ensure that he stays in power, that he stays enriched from the situation, because he's made a lot from just being the president of Congo, made lots of money. Now, the idea that this is being done to basically allow Kabila to stay in power should not be surprising, because we should know that these elections have been often done to cover the actual reason for, or the actual interests that are going on at the time. So I'll use Zimbabwe as an example. And Zimbabwe has a lot going on right now, as some of you probably know. Zimbabwe under Mugabe, everyone thought that they wanted an election. Everyone thought that they wanted to have an actual voting, that would make them, I think it's kind of like in the Bible where the Israelites, they said, we want a king because we want to be like everyone else. I think that Zimbabwe was like, we want an election because we want to be like everyone else. Unfortunately, after the election in Zimbabwe, they have a new leader. However, they have worsened the situation. So they have the symbol. The symbol of election is all symbolic. It's not actually true democracy. It's not true representative participation inside the electoral process if you're actually not getting your interest to be actually attended to. So it was all done as a symbolic gesture, and because of that, you have the conditions worsening in Zimbabwe, and you don't have Mugabe in power. And say what you want about Mugabe, but at least he was willing to stand up to the West about key issues. One of the key issues being the ownership of land inside of Zimbabwe by Western governments, after the country had won its independence. So at least, he was going to be strong on those issues. And at least he did have a Pan-Africanist background, a Pan-Africanist understanding. Whereas we have the new leader who, let me see if I can look up his name. Actually, I don't want to butcher it. But right now we have the new leader of Zimbabwe, who we know is not for the people, but actually, again, for himself. In fact, we also know that this leader was put into Zimbabwe because of the Chinese government. So, again, that was because of outside interests. And his name is Emerson Mnangagwa. So, that's the current leader of Zimbabwe. So, I'm saying all this to say, we have to stop fighting for new elections. And I honestly believe that. We have to stop fighting for just elections. We have to stop fighting just to have an election. Elections are symbolic if you don't have follow-up, if you don't have a movement, which is most important, to precede the election and a follow-up plan. How is this going to be different than what happened previous to that? Are we just doing an election? Or are we doing a constitutional referendum to completely replace the Constitution? Or are we going to have a revolution and actually start this government over and say that what we have has been handed down to us from Western governments, and a lot of these constitutions have been written by Western governments, and if anything, we need to completely do away with those systems and actually do something that is very profitable to the people and not to those outside governments. And the last thing I'll say on this before I go, Nkrumah, he believed that in order for Africa to prevent being a victim of Western imperialism, colonialism, that the only way to do that was to have a united Africa. And he's been proven right. Because what we have right now is we have different results in different places. We have places that aren't as so bad. We have places that are really bad. So, for example, you might say the Congo is horrible, right? As far as what's going on in the country, as far as the people, are they getting represented? Are they getting any type of help? Are they poor? The Congo is very horrible, right? But you have Rwanda, who's supposedly doing great. But at the same time, Rwanda, while they're supposedly doing great, they have crazy issues because they're actually taking a lot of their mineral wealth from the Congo. And then you go over to other places. There's governments in Africa that are stable per se. For example, you could say Ghana is stable per se. You could say South Africa is stable per se. You could say a lot of different places are stable. But the fact is that these results are so dispersed because they're not united. And I don't know what united Africa should look like because, to Nkrumah, it was actually literal. We have to be straight up united. You've had people like Malema said we have to have the United States of Africa. And if that's what is necessary to prevent the further deterioration of the African people under colonial rule, under colonial interest, then that's what we have to move towards. So we have to figure out a way to actually curb the effects of outside interference. And is there a way to do that without being united? I don't think so, personally. Are we going to be united? Let's say we're in Ghana and everything's great, but our neighbors, Togo, are doing horrible. Our people in Nigeria are doing horribly. Or people, and our people all over are doing horribly. But we're doing fine. Well, we're in the middle of occupied territory, of enemy territory. We're in the middle of countries that are being used, or countries that are being depleted for their resources. So if we're in the middle of that and we don't really have anyone who has the similar interest to fight for African people as our allies, then is it reasonable to really believe that if we continue on as a free and independent Ghana, that we're actually going to be safe whenever those interests, Western interests, turn on us? And the answer, of course, is no. So we have to think about real coalitions. And just to sum up, not just coalitions for United Africa, but movements that go beyond the democratic process, movements that go beyond elections. Because regardless of what happens, regardless of who's in power, like I said, in the United States, Democrat, Republican, whatever, we're still facing the same issues. It doesn't matter which one of them is in power. So the issue can't be the politics. The issue has to be power. And ultimately, if you're not having a change of power in your country, you're not having a change. So I will sum that up as saying, you know, to my people in Democratic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I would not be so concerned about not getting your person elected. I would be more concerned about not having power. And regardless of who was elected, the same setup would have been in existence. So let's turn our attention from who won or who did not win, and turn our attention instead to how do we get power, how do we get a government that actually gives us power. Is it going to be done through the democratic process? Is it going to be done by laws? Or is it going to be done straight up by revolution? And that's something to be determined by the people. So that's all I have for today. I love to see your comments, and I will see you all in another video.